movies are having way less sex. The data is suggesting that things are seriously changing, and I wanted to figure out why. Hi, I'm Stephen Follows, the film data scientist. I come up with new movie records for Guinness World Records, but today we're figuring out why Hollywood has lost that loving feeling. So let's start at the beginning. In the early days of movies, you couldn't show sex on screen, so audiences had to rely on all sorts of horny metaphors and symbols. Sultry stuff. But as society changed and censorship rules relaxed, things got steamy and sweaty and sticky and whatever this is. But as happens to all of us at some point, the sex started to slow down. To show you what I mean, let's look at something graphic and drooping down. It's a graph, all right? It's a graph. What it shows is that over the last quarter century, there's been a massive decline in the amount of sex on screen. We're talking about 40% less sex, and it's fairly consistent. At this point, you might be wondering, how do I get this data? Well, I used a whole bunch of signals from parental guides, censorship bodies, certification notes, reviews, and many other signals to track the amount of sex, nudity, violence, drugs, and all that other fun stuff that's in movies. None of these sources are perfect on their own, but they are consistent over time, and together they paint a pretty good picture of what's in most movies. And hold on, were you actually listening to me or looking at the woman in the red dress? Look again. The first thing you might assume is that the world has in general become more prudish. But when we use the same methods we're using to track sex on screen to look at the other fun stuff, like violence, drugs, and f***ing swearing, we can see that the rest have stayed pretty stable. Sex is the outlier, and it's the only one drooping down.
Now f*** off.
So let's get under the covers and work out what's happening here. Is this about all films becoming milder, or just some of them? And it's here we find a really important detail. The biggest driver of this whole trend is the rise in films containing no sexual content at all. In the early 2000s, around 15 to 20% of top-grossing films were completely sexless. But today, it's closer to half. This clean film category has been fruitful and multiplied. So it's not that individual sex scenes have been toned down, per se. It's that more and more films simply don't have any of this kind of intimacy on screen whatsoever. If we drill a little deeper, we can see that it's not affected all the genres equally. The greatest declines have been amongst action films and thrillers, where their sexual content index has fallen by almost 60% over the same time period. Meanwhile, romance films haven't seen much of a decline at all within the genre. The sexual content in romance films is roughly the same as it was previously. But the thing is, there are far fewer romance films being made than there have been in the past. So the genre that keeps sex on screen alive is getting fewer and fewer outings, and the genres that don't need sex now dominate the release calendar. So this is the backdrop of where the sex is disappearing. Now, let's talk about the reasons. I think we can group them into 4 erogenous zones. Sorry, just zones, or zones. First up, the industrial zone. Blockbusters have become much more part of Hollywood's output. And because these films cost a fortune, they have to appeal to the widest possible audience, across age, gender, geography, everything. A film featuring sex scenes has narrowed its audience, reducing the potential customer base. They also slow the pacing. Blockbusters are built around momentum, and a sex scene can instantly change the tone and rhythm, and most tentpole movies can't absorb that kind of tonal gear shift. Next, you've got the fact that it's a global marketplace. Studio movies heavily rely on overseas income, and some major markets, like China and much of the Middle East, are significantly stricter about sexual content than they are about violence. So remove the sex, keep the market. Studios want the PG-13 rating, just edgy enough to feel exciting, but not so spicy that anyone complains. Violence can be trimmed, softened, and stylized. It's quite flexible. But sex is, well, more rigid. And perhaps the fastest way to turn a PG-13 into an R is to contain sex scenes. Another industrial factor is that Hollywood is making far fewer mid-budget adult dramas. These used to be the home of sexual storytelling. Erotic thrillers, character dramas, grown-up romances, that kind of thing. And that whole tier of filmmaking has shrunk dramatically. Hollywood used to make sweaty Michael Douglas erotic thrillers by the buttload, but not so much anymore. I mean, what's a stupid, sexy Michael Douglas to do now?
Ants.
Oh,
Ants.
yeah.
Ant-Man.
Well, actually, that's the next point. Brands and franchises.
That guy looks like broccoli.
These brands and franchises need to stay safe. Modern characters live across toys, games, theme parks, Halloween costumes. They're commercial assets. And the sex in the movie would complicate the brand identity and risk some of that merchandising value. So the studios play it safe and keep things clean. Okay, that was industrial. Let's move on to second base. The cultural zone. The Me Too movement had a major impact, not just behind the camera, but also about what we see on screen. Particularly, it made everyone more attuned to unwanted nudity, power imbalances, exploitative dynamics, and pressure on performers. For example, some of the big actors from Game of Thrones have shared openly how uncomfortable they felt shooting some sex and nude scenes that they had to do in the early seasons when they had far less power. That landscape has changed quite a lot since then. Today, if an actor feels they're being pressured into doing a nude or sex scene, they're far more likely to be listened to and heard and taken seriously if they do complain. A related trend is that we've seen a massive rise in the number of intimacy coordinators. These are trained professionals, somewhere between an acting coach and a sexy fight coordinator, or maybe a sexy animal handler, but a sexy sex.
Hello, my name is Doug Seuss, and this is my lifelong friend and companion.
They help choreograph intimate moments openly and clearly. They're there to ensure that what happens in real life on set is safe and consenting, which is unquestionably a good thing. But it does add more time, cost, and oversight to scenes that producers previously thought they could just slip in. All of this means it's easier to avoid sex scenes entirely than to navigate the new, more nuanced, careful process that everybody expects. Zooming out a bit, culturally, we've all become a bit more aware of vulnerability. We don't want to watch actors looking uncomfortable. We don't want to feel uncomfortable when watching them. We also know far more about the performers because of social media, who they are, how they feel, what they stand for, which makes their vulnerability more immediate, which takes us on to what the audience is doing, or in some cases, what the audience is doing elsewhere. TV has stolen cinema's thunder. Prestige TV does intimacy far better than most movies. Shows like Normal People, Bridgerton, Euphoria, they have more time and space and fewer restrictions, so they can build actual emotional arcs before the clothes come off. Next, the internet. If you were a teenager in the 1980s and you wanted to see nudity, you had to find an X-rated VHS and hope your parents didn't walk in. Now, the internet provides, well, everything. It's not just direct porn we're talking about here, there's also erotic fiction, fan fiction, AI-generated everything, thirst trap stan edits, entire communities dedicated to extremely specific sexy scenarios.
Tom Holland.
Audiences can customize their intimacy diet to whatever flavor they want. So while cinema used to be one of the few access points for erotic or romantic simulation, it's now just one tiny corner of a gigantic landscape.
Great movie.
Next, young audiences want different kinds of sex scenes. Recent surveys have shown that they're far more interested in intimacy that feels emotionally grounded, realistic, mutual, based on consent, and basically not like a perfume advert from 1996. They actively dislike scenes that feel gratuitous or inauthentic. So bad sex scenes are being punished. Not in a 50 Shades I've been a bad girl punish kind of way, but more like I boringly drained away all the momentum, stole the story, and left you painfully aware that the performers look like they'd rather be anywhere else kind of way. That makes filmmakers nervous, as it probably should. Next, romance is no longer a required ingredient. In the 1980s and 1990s, it kind of felt like you had to bolt a romantic subplot to every action film, so the female lead had something to do other than just scream. But that era is gone. Stories can exist without any romance at all, and nobody questions it, which means there are far fewer narrative excuses to include gratuitous sex. And then also cinema audiences have fragmented. We no longer all watch the same films. Genres are becoming more niche, demographics are becoming more specific, and viewing habits are becoming way more diverse. You don't need to throw in a generic love scene to broaden the appeal. All of these audience factors mean that while the audiences aren't rejecting sex, they're just not relying on movies for it, and they can be far pickier about what they want and they can get it elsewhere. Next, the creative zone. Let's talk about how stories themselves have changed. Because the big story here isn't that cinema is having less sex, it's that it needs less sex. So there's less sex. Modern heroes are emotionally wounded but less romantically driven than they were in the past. Think about some of the biggest on-screen characters of the last decade. Batman, Joker, John Wick, Furiosa. These are people who need therapy, but not a weekend away in a log cabin with scented candles. They're f***ed, but not like they used to be. The emotional trajectories are much more about trauma, identity, purpose, rather than seduction. And if your main character is grieving, avenging, or saving the multiverse, there's not much time for slow, tender undressing. In addition to the main characters and subplots, romantic subplots are no longer mandatory. For decades, Hollywood screenwriting worked like a checklist: hero, villain, comic relief, love interest. And if you were the female lead in an action film, your job was to kiss the protagonist and then get kidnapped. Characters can exist for reasons other than decorative motivation, so the whole romantic arcs and sex scenes they came with have diminished. Next, we've got the rise of superheroes and IP, which changes the emotional palette. Superhero movies are structured around purity, ideals, and archetypes. They're aspirational and they're aimed at wide audiences. They sell lunchboxes. Superman can save the world, but he can't realistically also spend 3 minutes fumbling with a bra clasp in a dimly lit apartment without breaking the brand. In addition, filmmakers are much more aware of the gaze.
Do you have the Texas Chainsaw Mascara?
No, not that gaze. No, not that gaze. The male gaze.
The boys make the noise.
Traditionally, a lot of cinema was shot from a particular visual perspective, that of the horny heterosexual male point of view, where women were much more likely to be framed as objects of desire rather than fully realized people.
See you around.
That's not to say that that is a good or bad point of view.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
It's just that that was the aesthetic default the industry sat in for decades. Audiences today are far more diverse, they're more vocal, and frankly, they want to be seen. The male gaze remains in many movies, and it still has a place in culture, but it's less likely to be the only perspective that satisfies the entire room. So filmmakers are far more cautious about how they frame intimacy. The scenes that feel gratuitous, outdated, or aimed just at one demographic will get called out instantly. Together, this means that the sex scenes now have to justify their place in the story, which turns out it can't do very often. For 100 years, romance was a shorthand for, I care about someone, therefore I have something to lose. But modern stories rely increasingly on other stakes: identity, trauma, family, survival, existential threat, artificial intelligence gone rogue, the list goes on.
I love my popcorn. Movies, popcorn.
Sorry. Okay, where were we? Finally, and I think this is a big one, cinema was never really the ideal home for sex scenes. It's communal, it's public, you're surrounded by strangers eating nachos, and the seats make noises when you move. Even the best sex scenes can feel slightly odd in that environment. With hindsight, it's kind of remarkable they lasted as long as they did. Let's bring it all together for the meta zone, or the it's not you, it's cinema zone. The moment in the relationship where you sit on the sofa, sigh and say, it's not that I don't like you, I've just changed. Because that's basically what's happened to cinema. It's grown up. Its needs have shifted. When it was younger, sex was exciting, rebellious, and a bit taboo. It gave films an immediate jolt of energy and intimacy. But now the industry has other priorities. Global reach, brand safety, pacing, continuity, world building, happy shareholders. The larger truth is, sex used to serve a storytelling and commercial purpose, and now it largely doesn't. So when you do see sex on screen now, you know that it fully aligns with both those needs. So there you have it. As things mature, the sex declines, but the intimacy increases. Plus, you can get all the porn you want from the internet. Bye! Oh, by the way, feel free to subscribe for more stupid, sexy, data science-based movie research.